in our last video, we were talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I briefly mentioned in the Constitution about how the Constitution set up the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to break down the different branches of government and how they work within our nation, as well as our state and locally with our local government. The delegates of the Constitutional Convention wanted to make sure that they separated powers of the national government. They didn't want one group or one person to have more power than the others, and so they set up three branches of government that would allow for the equal sharing of powers. These branches are the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. Article 1 of the Constitution establishes the legislative branch. The debate at the time was how many representatives were going to come from each state. The smaller states didn't want it to be based on population because they had less population. The larger states, that would really benefit them. And so they had to come up with a compromise in order to balance out that power and not make certain states stronger than other states. So the Great Compromise, which we discussed in a previous video, decided that Congress would be made up of two separate houses. The House of Representatives would be based on population of the state. The representatives would serve 2-year terms, and there would be no limit of the number of terms that they could serve. So some of the jobs that they have in the House of Representatives is to write bills that make people pay taxes. It's also going to set up other jobs that they have other jobs that would affect state level government. In order to serve in the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years old. You have to have lived in the United States for the last 7 years, and you must live in the state that you represent. The Senate is the other house. It has 2 representatives from each state. Therefore, there are currently 100 senators because we have 50 states. The Senate can approve or veto treaties that the president writes or decisions that the president makes about who should be in a government official. So the president has cabinet officers, which we will discuss in our next unit. There's also Supreme Court justices that serve in the judiciary branch, as well as ambassadors. In order to serve on the Senate, you must be at least 30 years old and have lived in the United States for the past 9 years. Again, you must live in the state that you represent. Whereas the House of Representatives, it stated that, you can see here that it stated that there was no limit on your term, but you serve for 2 years. In contrast, the Senate is able to serve for 6 years, and they must be reelected. But they also have unlimited terms that they can be reelected in. The legislative branch makes the laws. They also approve of making money and decide how the government is going to spend the money. So they have to come up with a budget and decide how that money is going to be spent within our country, as well as states and then local government. Congress controls trade between the states and other countries. And it also has the power to approve decisions that are made by the executive branch, which we'll learn in the next few slides that the executive branch is made up of the president and the vice president. If a government official breaks the law, Congress has the power to remove that person from their position. The executive branch is set up in Article 2 of the Constitution, and this branch has one leader, which is the president. The vice president, of course, goes along, he helps out, but the president is the leader of the executive branch. The president can serve a 4-year term. He must be at least 35 years old, or he or she must be at least 35 years old, and they must be a natural-born citizen and have lived in the United States for the past 14 years. Presidents can serve 2 terms. This was established in the 22nd Amendment. They didn't want anybody to stay in the presidency for too long, because in that situation, it would almost feel as though that person had become a king or a dictator even, and they didn't want that to happen. The whole purpose of setting up the Constitution the way they did was to limit power of one individual. So they set up the presidency in the 22nd Amendment to only allow for a two-term presidency, and that president was also considered the commander-in-chief of our military. So they can make very important decisions based on what's going on in other countries around us, whether or not we're going to be involved in different wars and conflicts, which we know we have over the past many years. The vice president is also in this branch. If the president were no longer able to do their job, the vice president would take over. The vice president is also the president of the Senate and would help delegate things that are going on within the Senate. The executive branch carries out the laws. They can also approve or veto bills that are sent by the legislative branch. If the vice president or the president vetoes a bill, it goes back to Congress and can be approved by the 2/3 in order to override the veto. So we talked earlier about like the way that you have to go back and forth between the branches to determine if something's going to pass or be or not pass. And we'll talk about checks and balances after we break down the different branches of government. The executive branch also allows the president to make suggestions to the bills that can or cannot be created. He meets with the leaders of other countries in order to create treaties with them. And then the president has the power to appoint judges, ambassadors, and department leaders, but the Congress must approve, which makes sure that the president does not become too powerful. Now we're going to look at the judicial branch. Article 3 of the Constitution sets up the judicial branch, which is the court system. This is the Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States, and there are 9 Supreme Court justices. Here recently, one of our Supreme Court justices died, and we recently appointed a new one. So this picture is a little out of date, but those are the 9 Supreme Court justices at the time of the picture. The justices on the Supreme Court are appointed by the president, but they must be approved by the Senate, and they can serve for life. So unless they resign or retire, there is no limit to their term as a Supreme Court justice. There are no requirements for becoming a justice. However, they have to have at least some training and education in law. Many of them have come from political backgrounds. Many have worked in Congress, were governors of their states, or they worked closely with the president in his cabinet before they were appointed. The judicial branch makes sure that the laws are fair and they follow the laws of the Constitution. When Congress creates new laws, the judicial branch makes sure that those laws are constitutional or they cannot be passed. The Supreme Court also hears legal cases that make it through the court system to federal court and hear cases when federal laws are broken, as well as cases that challenge the Constitution. Once the Supreme Court has made a decision, that decision is final. So now that we know what the 3 branches are, who it's made up of, we've discussed terms and things, we're going to look at the checks and balances that are involved in order to make sure that each of these different branches are not becoming too powerful or having more power than the other, that the decisions that they make are fair because they are checking one another. Checks and balances. So the framers of the Constitution, they wanted to empower the federal government because the Articles of Confederation were weak, but they didn't want to empower them too much. So the Constitution established these branches and decided that they were going to share those powers, but they wanted to share it equally in order for all of the different branches to be able to agree and have a say and make sure that the federal government did not have too much power in the end. These powers allow the branches to watch over each other. The system is called checks and balances because it keeps one branch from becoming more powerful than the other, and it also keeps branches from being able to misuse their power. Each branch has a way to check or block the power of other branches, which is meant to keep the power of each branch in the whole nation or the whole national government balanced. There are three levels of government, which I've kind of alluded to. There's the federal government, which is the entire country. State government, so every one of the 50 states has their own government, as well as local government, such as the governors or the mayors of our cities. And all three of these levels of government also have three branches of government, the legislative, executive, and judicial. These branches share power just like they do at the national level, and all three levels collect taxes to pay for governmental services. As far as federal government power goes, these take care of issues that affect the entire country. They make sure that our military forces are well trained and equipped. They also support national parks, help protect and clean the environment, and run programs to help children, elderly, and people who are sick. The federal government makes laws for the entire nation. At the state level, state governments do jobs like managing and maintaining state parks and highways. They also oversee public school as well as state colleges and universities. There are programs at the state level that help people in poverty that need food, shelter, and health care. The legislative branch at the state government makes laws specific to that state. Some of the things that states can't do, they can't print their own money, they can't create their own armies, and they can't make treaties with other countries. At the state level, we are led by a governor and other state officials that are elected by the people of that state. And then at the local government level, this includes our county and city governments, and they are led by the mayor. There's also a city council that makes up the legislative branch that it helps to decide what laws are going to be good for the community. The local government is responsible for parks and recreation, police and fire departments, emergency and medical services, as well as taking care of streets. These officials are elected by the people. So that helps us understand a little bit more about the jobs of the executive, legislative, and judicial branch, as well as breaks down how that affects our country, state, and local level government power.